G'day guys, this is Andrew Price here from BlenderGuru.com, and in this video tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to create sparks. Now this is really easy to do. It's going to be a very quick tutorial. We're going to be creating this result right here, but using this same method you can use it to create a variety of different looking sparks. So I went ahead and created a short 45-second animation using this method, which I will now show you right now. So let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of how you could use this tutorial. So we are actually going to be creating just this result that you can see right here. So you can then go ahead and use that for any of your different projects that you're going to create. But yeah, the video I just showed you, that's just an idea of something that you could do. Anyways, this is the finished scene right here. It's very basic, as I explained at the start. We're just going to be using this new particle info node, which is a new feature in Blender, which lets us to change the materials of the particles as they animate. So that's very cool. Yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So go ahead and open up a new scene in Blender. And the first thing we're going to be doing is creating the spark emitter, so where the particles are actually going to be emitting from. Pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to go ahead and delete both that cube and that lamp there, and I'm going to replace it with a cylinder. Okay, and I'm going to rotate this cylinder 90 degrees. I'm in side view mode right now, so that's number pad 3 to do that. And then what I'm going to do in front view, I'm just going to use the box tool, and I'm going to delete, say, 3/4 of it, just like that. So I now have just this segment right here. Now, this is going to be where the particles are thrown from. So that's why we're deleting the other part of that, because we just want it to be thrown in that direction. And I also want it to be just emitting from one point, so like one strip like that. So I'm just scaling it along the y-axis, so that's S and then Y, and that's just creating a thin strip like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and then scale that down to be something really small, yeah, about that. So that is now our emitter. Very easy. So the next thing we're going to do is create a particle system for that emitter. So just going to the particle system over here, what I'm going to do is, yeah, add a new particle system. And I'm going to set the number of particles to be 25,000. So I guess quite a lot more than the default settings. And I only want my animation to be 100 frames long. So just set that there. And I want the lifetime of these sparks, so each one of these little sparks, to be no longer than 15 frames. So that is less than a second. So it's pretty short, but that's, yeah, roughly about the birth rate of them, I guess. It's a weird term. I'm also going to turn up the random amount to be about a 0.9. So that means that the maximum lifetime is 15 frames, but it could die at pretty much any point within that. So setting that there, because you know how, well, I guess if you watch footage of sparks, yeah, some of them die early, some of them, you know, linger on for a little bit too long. So anyway, setting that random will fix that for us. Next, I want to set the random right there, so it actually emits from random faces, not jittered. And then the next thing, I want to set the, I suppose I should set the end size of my animation to be just 100 frames. And I'm going to set the normal amount here to be 10. So it's now spraying out like crazy. By the way, you can see those lines there. And now the reason you can see those lines is because if you have a look at our cylinder right here, you've got that jagged edge there where the vertices are. So the way to get rid of those lines are if you add a subsurf modifier and then place it on top of the particle system. If we now replay that, you can see that those lines are a lot less noticeable. And then if you wanted to take it even further, which we are going to do, I'm going to turn this random amount up to be 5. So that means that they're now going to be spraying in a lot of different directions. So it's now, it doesn't have that horrible looking streak effect there. So that fixes that. Now we want there to be a floor. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a plane. And I'm going to make that to be roughly the size of that grid right there. And I'm also, because we want this floor to interact with the particles, going up here to the physics panel, and with the plane selected, I'm going to turn on collision. And I'm going to turn up the dampening. Now the dampening is basically when a particle hits it, how bouncy do you want those particles to bounce off it? So if you set that all the way up to 1, that means that the particles will not bounce. They will just hit it and stop exactly. So I'm going to set this to be about a 0.7, yeah. And I'll give it a random amount of a 0.1. So some of them will be slightly more bouncy than others, but about that amount. So they have a little bit of bounce, but they mostly die. And then the friction, I'm going to set that to be 0.8. And then again, I'll give it a little bit of a random as well. And now one important thing to note is that with anything, if you have any object with collision that is supposed to be interacting with your particles, they need to be on the same layer as ours are right now. If they're not on the same layer, then they will not interact, and Blender will give you no clues as to why that is. So just make a note of that and make sure it's always on the same layer. So you can see now, you've got a couple going through there, doesn't really matter. I think that's the, that's the cache problem. Every 10 frames, it's doing cache. But anyway, the particles are now stopping on the actual surface where it should right there. So that is now looking quite good indeed. Now you can see that it's kind of throwing those sparks a little bit too far back. So if you want, you can go ahead and delete a couple more of these vertices, and that will mean that the particles are now thrown mostly forward. So like that direction. Wow, that's almost exact 90 degrees, isn't it? That's yeah, you know, I'll delete 3. So let's just there we go. Now you got some sparks going yeah, about that direction. That's pretty good. Okay, cool. All right, so sparks, done and dusted. They're now working pretty good. So now what we need to do is actually make it so they are renderable. Because if you were to render this right now, you wouldn't see anything. At least, I don't think you would. Let's go ahead and give it a try. Yeah, you don't see anything. Because these particles just exist in the Blender world. They don't exist in the render world. I guess that's the best way to put it. So what we need to do is we need to create a separate object that Blender can use to render on each one of these particles. So that is going to be, I guess, what is called the dupli object. So for that, we need to use a very, very low poly sphere or icosphere. So I'm going to use an icosphere, which gives you, I guess, just a few less particles and a few less faces than the UV sphere. Actually, I'm not going to scale that down. I'm just going to keep this size as it is, but I'm just going to drop it just beneath the plane right there, so it's out of view of the camera. So you can see in the bottom left-hand corner there, or in the toolbar on the left-hand side, the name is icosphere. So with our particle system here selected, if we go to the particle settings, down here where it's got render, you can see that it's set to halo, which is like a method that the internal renderer used to render particles. Halo doesn't actually work in cycles, so it wouldn't render anything anyway. We're going to change that to object, and then here where it's got dupli object, I'm going to select icosphere. So now each one of those particles is displaying as an icosphere, but it's much too big. Much too big. I'm going to turn down the size of that to be 0.01, but it's still too big as well, so I'm going to get a little bit closer. Let's go 0.0. Hang on, I said 3. Yeah, there you go. Okay, my number pad wasn't turned on. Okay, yeah, I go 0.03. I think that's pretty good size. Because you have to keep in mind we're going to be using the motion blur as well. So some of these will have a little bit more thickness to them once you add the motion blur, because it'll take up a bit more screen space. And I'm also going to turn up the random scale as well. I'm going to turn that up to be 0.9. I'm stopping it from going all the way to 1, because then you'll have some which are like actually almost non-existent. But if you keep it at least 0.9, then it'll be like a minimum size of, whatever that one was right there, I guess. Yeah, okay, so you can see they're now looking pretty good. Now, if we were to render this right now, we should see a very, very uninspiring, you can see just, if you zoom in there, you can just see it. That's because it doesn't have any material yet. Everything has had the exact same material, and there's not actually any lights either. So to make it even worse, I'm going to kill any light source that there is. I'm going to make the background completely black, and I'm going to move the camera to front view. So if I look at it from front view, if I hit Control Alt number pad 0, just snap the camera to the front view there. That's a little shortcut. All right, looking pretty good. Now, if we want to apply a material to our sparks, as we do, then we don't actually apply it to this thing right here, this emitter, because that's actually not even going to be rendered. In fact, yeah, underneath the render settings in particle, uncheck emitter, because you don't want to see that. We actually just need to apply the materials all to this icosphere right here, because that is what Blender is using to render it. So go to the material settings and go ahead and add a new material. Now I'm going to go and split up my window here, because we're going to be doing some fancy stuff with the node editor. So it's important we have access to that. So have a guess what type of material we need for sparks. Okay, so sparks are bright, aren't they? They're very light, and even in a dark room you will see a spark. So therefore it is an emitter. A light source in and of itself. That's a cool thing about cycles, is each little tiny object can emit its own light. You don't have to fake things by adding in lamps and all sorts of random stuff. Cycles does it all for you. It's very, very, I guess, accurate to the real world, so it's very cool in that regard. So if we give this a render now, we should now see our particles rendering. I guess the samples for it is far too low. Let me turn up my samples. Let's go to 500. I'll set it to GPU. Let's give this a render. Alright, here we go. Getting a bit better, but you get the point. So the particles are now showing up, but they're completely white. And they're very, very dim as well. So let's set the strength of those particles to be 30. So they're now a lot brighter. So they're now lighting up the rest of our scene a little bit better as well. So 30 I find is about right. I think once it, like if it peaks, I think it peaks at about 20. Like that's when Blender will be able to tell the difference in colors. But if you set it to 30, then it's kind of like it's blowing out the camera, which kind of gives it a little bit more realism as well. Anyway, in my experience. So it's pretty uninspiring looking render at the moment. So now we're going to be doing the fancy thing, which is using a particle info node. Where is that? Particle info. So hit Shift A, input, particle info. Go ahead and drop this bad boy in. Now this is a very, very cool new feature of Blender, which I love. Before we had this, there was no way to do what we're about to do. So what this particle info node will let us do is to change the materials of the particles in regards to where they are in the animation. So you can see that you've got age, lifetime, location size, velocity, a whole bunch of different things like that. So we can then use that to change the color, we can make it fade in and out, we can do all sorts of fancy cool things with it. And that actually, this particle info node is what inspired this tutorial and the animation that you saw at the start, was because I heard about the particle info node and I was like, yes, I've been wanting this feature for years. Like I've been trying to create sparks and little explosions and stuff like that. And the annoying thing is that when you use particle system for it, is you could set the material how you want, but then always whenever the particles would reach their death, they would just disappear like instantly. They would go from completely bright to just vanishing. And it completely destroyed any believability of the animation. Because, sparks, for example, they fade out. They don't just die. They slowly fade out. That's the way they are. That's how fireworks behave. It's how a whole bunch of different things behave. So it's really, really, it's a crucial feature of Blender. This particle info node, it has been needed for years. So I'm really, really, really super glad that it's finally here and that I can show you how to use it. Okay, let's get cracking. So what we need to do is we need to add in a math node. So you're probably wondering, why do we need a math node? Well, yeah, it gets a little bit fancy. What we want to do is we want to take the output of the age and the output of the lifetime and plug it into that math node. And then we want to change the operation to be divide. So what this is essentially doing is it's taking the age of the particle and then dividing it by the lifetime. So the lifetime of our particle system is 15 frames. So the age of it is like per frame, how long has that individual particle been alive for? So it's sort of calculating it. So if it's like here, it's going to be like, whatever, 1. And then slowly as it goes over, because it's doing that division calculation, that value will be less and less. So what that means in this regard is we can take the output of this and then use it to change the material of things. Very, very cool. So, for example, let's have a look at how this looks when we do something cool. So you can see that the color of our particles are defined by this value right here. But you can see there is an input, so you can put something in there. Now you don't want to just connect that there, because that's not going to do anything. That's not going to render it. There's no color. There's nothing there. So what you want to do is add in a color ramp. Drop this in right here. Take the output, plug it in there. Take the color output, plug it in there. And now what this will do is the left-hand side, that will be the color of the particle at birth. And the right-hand side, that will be the color of the particle as of its death. So, the death of a particle, a spark, is an orangey red color. So let's set that. Let's go. I find it looks good if you kind of exaggerate it a bit. If we just go fully red like that. And then for the birth of the particle, it's a white, yellowy, hot color. So somewhere about that. Because having the emission set to 30, that's going to give it a little bit of a blown out look as well. So you can add a little bit more color in there. So something about that should look fine. So what we're going to do now is give that a render, and let's see if our operation has worked correctly. I can see already that it kind of is, and I can also see that I've got way too many tiles. If you had a look at the post that I made last week, I showed you that the performance is best operated at 256 by 256 for GPUs. So I'm just going to change that because we've got too many tiles here. It's taking too long. Anyway, let's have a look. You can see on the right here where it's the particles are being born. They are born as a white hot color, and then as they trail off towards the end there, they become an orangey red color. Now you can see that you've got some particles that are over here which are like a white hot color, right? Well, the reason for that is a few things, and that's mainly because not all the particles are following the exact same route. Some of them have a random amount to it, so some of them are traveling faster than others, and also we have a random lifetime size. So some of the particles in here, like this one here is like almost a solid red color, so that one's just about to die. And then these ones over here, some of these are like white because they've got different random amounts. So that one's about to die there, like quite early on. It was short-lived, had a very beautiful life, but it died just right there. And then at the end, these ones are just going to carry on for a little bit further. So they do have differing values, but you can see generally, especially if you just look at the ground, like if I just zoom in on this part right here, you can see they're white, yellow on that side, and then the ground, as it trails off, it becomes an orangey color. So that gives you an idea. And basically it tells us that it is working. Hooray! Okay, cool. But we want it to be a little bit better than that because we don't want the particles, because currently the way it would go is the particles would die and they would just disappear. And remember I told you that looks very, very unrealistic. You want them to fade away. So in order to do that, we're going to use this divide value again, but we're going to use it to basically act as the changing value between two different shaders. Okay, that probably doesn't make much sense. I'll just show you. So we're going to add in a transparent shader, and then I'm going to add in a mix shader. Make sure it's a mix shader, not a mix node. They're very different. And I'm going to drop it in, as you can see pictured right here. Pretty basic setup. You do this a lot with glossy and diffuse shaders. And I'm going to take the output of our divide node, or math node, whatever you want to call it. So it's pictured just like this. And then now, when we render that, it should now, the particles over here should be trailing off. Actually, you know what I should have done? Yeah, I'll give it a render with just this, and then I'll show you like the buffering value. Let's give that a render. Okay, so I'm going to hit J to save that into the buffer, and then I'll just connect this as it was before, like this, okay? And now I'll render it again. And what this will do is it'll allow me, if I hit J again, we can switch back between the two renders and we'll be able to see the difference that it makes. That's a little tip for you. So you just hit J, you've got the slots here, slot 1, slot 2. So you can have up to 8 different rendered images saved. And if you hit J, it sort of toggles between the two. Okay, so here we go. If I hit J, you can see the difference. So the particles that are red especially, you can see they slowly fade away in value. But the particles that are white hot, you can see they don't change almost at all. So that means it is now working. Woohoo! All right, so that's it. We've got it done. It's done and dusted. So the sparks, the particles, everything is ready to go. Everything's finished. So the result doesn't look very impressive at all, really, does it? Well, it looks cool when you have depth of field. So if you had the camera right here and we set the depth of field to be the cylinder, which is our particle emitter right there, that's what we're going to focus on. And then we set the f-stop to be something low, like 1. And then let's say, I'll duplicate that camera, and I'll just move this over here. I'll rotate this around. And let's just take a look at this. So this just gives you an idea of how I did the... Because a lot of people were asking in the comments of the, or I guess on Twitter or whatever, how the depth of field was done, like how it looked so lovely or whatever. It's pretty basic. That's all you do. There's nothing fancy about it. It's pretty uneventful. You just set the f-stop to be 1, which is really low, or even lower if you want to go extreme, like what I did. Say 0.2, and it'll probably take a while to render. Yeah, you get the picture. It's just a matter of just changing that value there. I think I'll probably do like a quick tip tutorial next week, and I'll show you a little bit more about that. But anyway, that's how you can do that little depth of field effect at the back there. But the other thing that I'm going to show you in this tutorial is using the motion blur. So depending on whatever version of Blender you may have, if you have just 2.64, you won't have this yet. So I think you need to download the latest build, the latest trunk build, which you can get from the link which I'll provide for you. And then you'll see this. So you go to the render panel right here, you click motion blur, and then when you hit render, you should be able to see blur. But you can't, can you? No. So you might be thinking, oh, this stupid feature, it doesn't work. And I think actually a few people, like, I saw it like submitted as a bug in the thing, saying that the motion blur doesn't work. It actually does work, but it only works in CPU mode. So you can see that my device is currently set to render using my graphics card. You need to change it to render using your CPU. So that means that it is going to take a really super long time to render. And that is why the animation that I created, it doesn't have motion blur on it at all, because it would just take far too long to render it. Because currently it's CPU. So in the future, I'm sure it's going to be enabled for GPU as well, but currently CPU only. So sorry guys, if you're planning on making an animation anytime soon, you might want to wait for it to be GPU enabled, because then you'll actually be able to have a life, I guess, outside of Blender. Anyway, so that's it. That's the streak effect right there. I'm gonna amp it up a little bit more. I'm gonna make this. Let's go 0.75. Give it a little bit more, and I'll turn up my samples. Set this to be 800, and I'll give it a render. Let's see how it looks. And there you have it. That's it. Final render. So you can see very quickly, it's very easy now to create sparks with very realistic, I guess, physical properties that actually emit light and have got trails according to how fast they're moving and the the shutter speed and things like that. So it's a very easy and quick method. So I used it to create that animation at the start there, and I didn't have motion blur enabled for the animation, but I decided to render the scene with motion blur. It took like an hour and a half per image. So this image here took like 90 minutes to render. It's absolutely crazy. But I also did a little bit of post-production. Now I guess I'm kind of breaking some Blender rules here, but I'm using a plugin called Magic Bullet Looks, which I use to you can do pretty much the same thing using the compositor, but it allows you to just very quickly change the look of an image, just using some very easy stuff there and just experiment with it. So I just started using this because I just thought it was kind of cool, and like I said, you can have a bit of fun with this kind of stuff. I know not everyone can afford it. It costs like $300 or something, but I thought it was kind of cool, so I just experimented with that, and I had a bit of fun with it, and that's how I got to the final result. You could see right there. So there you go, guys. That concludes this tutorial. I'm hoping that you can then use the methods for this very simple, easy way to create sparks using cycles and Blender. I'm hoping you can use that in a whole bunch of new projects. Have fun with it. This image that you can see here, it was created using the exact same method I just showed you. The reason it looks cool with all this bouncy stuff is because I physically modeled a circular saw with this guard and stuff like that, so it bounces off stuff and it looks a lot cooler. But that's basically it in a nutshell, guys. So I'm hoping you enjoyed this tutorial, and until next time, I will see you then.